The chandeliers did not stop the room from going silent when the most feared man in New York pulled the plus-size event planner onto his lap. 900 crystal teardrops kept burning overhead. The string quartet kept playing, but every conversation in the Whitmore Grand Ballroom died at once, and 200 of the city's wealthiest people turned to look at a woman they had spent the entire night pretending not to see. Her name was Marisol Hayes, and 3 hours earlier, she had walked into that ballroom the way she walked into every gala, invisible, essential, and completely in control. It was 7 o'clock when the doors opened. Marisol stood at the service entrance in her tailored black blazer, her comfortable flats, her headset clipped just behind her ear, and her tablet glowing with 62 vendor confirmations, 41 seating adjustments, and one very angry chef who had just discovered that the caviar delivery was 20 tins short. She was 34 years old. She had been planning events in New York for 11 years, coordinating for premier luxe events for the last 6, and in that time she had learned exactly one truth about galas like this one. The room was built for people who did not look like her. The aisles were narrow enough to flatter a woman in a size 2 gown, and just tight enough to make a size 20 body feel like a public inconvenience. The chairs were elegant and unforgiving. The mirrors in the powder room were angled to catch thin waists in beautiful light and nothing else. Marisol had learned to move through all of it anyway. She moved with the practiced economy of a woman who had spent a decade being underestimated, quick, precise, 3 steps ahead of every disaster before it happened. She caught a champagne flute before it hit the marble. She redirected a state senator's aide to the correct table before he humiliated himself in front of the mayor. She calmed a florist having a breakdown over hydrangeas that had wilted in transit. And she did it all while 140 guests in silk and tuxedos looked straight through her like she was part of the furniture. She was good at her job. She was better than good. She was the reason the Whitmore Grand's galas ran like silk instead of static, and not one person in that ballroom knew her name. Not one person, until Serena Vale decided to give her one. "Excuse me." Serena's voice cut through the champagne soft air like a blade wrapped in silk. "You're blocking the aisle." Marisol turned, tablet in hand, headset humming with someone else's crisis. Serena Vale was 26, blonde, sculpted into a column of white satin that had probably cost more than Marisol's monthly rent, and standing in the exact center of an aisle that was, in fact, perfectly clear. "I'm sorry," Marisol said evenly. "I'll move." "You should," Serena said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, loud enough that it was clearly the point. "Honestly, I don't know why they let people your size work a room like this. It's a liability. You could knock someone's whole table over." A ripple of laughter, thin and cruel, moved through the socialites near her. Marisol felt the heat climb her throat. She had absorbed 1,000 comments like this one over the years, about her body, her size, the space she took up in rooms designed to make her feel like an apology. She had built a wall for exactly this purpose, and she used it now. "I'll be sure to give your table extra room," Marisol said, and stepped aside and kept walking, because the job was the job and the caviar was still 20 tins short, and there was no time to bleed in front of people who would only enjoy the sight of it. But it hurt. It always hurt. It just never got to show. She was halfway back to the kitchen corridor when the temperature of the entire ballroom changed. She felt it before she understood it. A shift in the air, a ripple moving outward from the main doors, conversations dimming, heads turning. She looked up in time to see him walk in. Dante Romano did not enter a room. He conquered it, quietly, without ever raising his voice or hurrying his step. He was tall, built like a man who had once done violence for a living and had never fully put the habit down. His suit was charcoal, cut close, expensive in a way that did not announce itself the way old money did. No crest, no monogram, nothing that needed to prove what it was. His dark hair was combed back with careless precision. His jaw was shadowed even at 7 in the evening, and his hands, Marisol noticed his hands because everyone noticed his hands, were marked with ink that disappeared beneath his cuffs. Old ink, prison ink, some said, though nobody said it to his face. 2 men flanked him, wide-shouldered, watchful, their eyes moving across the room in slow, professional sweeps. Dante Romano owned Romano Properties, a real estate and hospitality empire with its name on 4 hotels, 2 office towers, and half the luxury renovations south of 59th Street. That was the story printed in the business section. The story whispered in rooms like this one was different. Dante Romano's grandfather had built the family's first fortune running the docks. His father had expanded it through numbers rackets and construction kickbacks. Dante had inherited both empires, the legal one and the other one, and over the last decade, he had spent every waking hour trying to bury the second one so deep beneath the first that no one could dig it out again. Nobody in this room said any of that out loud. They didn't have to. It lived in the way the crowd parted for him, in the way 3 different socialites drifted toward his path like moths discovering a flame they'd been warned about and wanted anyway, in the way he walked past every single one of them without breaking stride. He sat in the VIP alcove near the northern windows, in the exact chair that had been left empty and waiting, as though the room itself had known better than to fill it. Marisol clocked him the way she clocked everything, a fact to be managed, a VIP table that would need careful handling, nothing more. She had learned not to let dangerous men interest her. Dangerous men rarely tipped well and always caused problems. She had no idea yet how wrong she was. At 8:40, Dante's table sent a request through the floor manager, a bottle of 1974 Macallan, one of only 3 in the building, kept in a locked case behind the main bar for exactly this kind of night. The 2 servers assigned to VIP service exchanged a look Marisol recognized instantly. Fear, not the ordinary fear of spilling wine on a senator. The specific, particular fear of walking a rare bottle to a table that belonged to a man like Dante Romano and getting something, anything, wrong in front of him. "I'll take it," Marisol said, already moving. She retrieved the bottle herself, set 2 crystal glasses and a linen runner on a silver tray, and crossed the ballroom floor with the calm, unhurried competence of a woman who had carried far heavier things through far worse rooms. Serena Vale was standing 3 feet from Dante's table when Marisol approached, angling herself into his line of sight with the practiced desperation of a woman who had spent the whole night failing to be noticed by the one man in the building who mattered. She had watched him ignore 3 other women already. She had watched him ignore her. Marisol didn't see the exact moment Serena's foot moved. Nobody would ever prove it was deliberate, though everyone at the surrounding tables would later swear that it was. What Marisol felt was the sudden absence of floor beneath her flats, the tray tipping, the sound of crystal exploding against marble, the amber shock of scotch and the sharp high crack of glass, and the horrifying, weightless certainty that she was about to hit the ground in front of 200 people who had spent all night waiting for exactly this kind of spectacle. She did not hit the ground. A hand closed around her waist, wide, tattooed, absolutely certain, and instead of simply steadying her, it pulled her directly onto a lap that had not existed in her plans for the evening at all. Marisol landed against Dante Romano's chest with her heart slamming and her cheeks burning, one of his hands flat and firm across her waist, the other braced against her thigh to keep her from sliding, and the entire ballroom went silent at once, as if someone had reached out and switched off the sound of the world. For 1 full second, Marisol Hayes did not breathe. She expected disgust. She expected the frozen, polite horror of a wealthy man realizing he had a plus-size woman's full weight in his lap in front of everyone he did business with. She braced for the flinch, the retreat, the apology that would somehow become about her. None of it came. "Are you hurt?" Dante asked. His voice was low, rough at the edges, pitched only for her. "I know. I'm fine. I'm so sorry You didn't fall," he said, and something in his tone had gone flat and cold in a way that had nothing to do with her. "You were tripped." Marisol's mouth opened, closed. Around them, the ballroom held its breath, 200 pairs of eyes fixed on the tableau of the city's most feared man with a plus-size event planner in his arms and murder in his voice. Dante's gaze lifted past her shoulder and found Serena Vale. "Pick up your foot again like that," he said, "and it will be the last time it works correctly." Serena's face went white, then defensive, the way cruelty always curdles into denial when it's caught. "I didn't. She's clumsy, she's clearly too. She should not be working a room like this if she can't even carry a tray without." "I watched your foot move," Dante said, and his voice did not rise, which made it worse. "I watched it move deliberately into her path. Do you think I am blind, or do you think I am stupid? Choose one, because you have insulted me either way." The silence sharpened. "You will apologize to her," Dante said, "now, loud enough for the tables that watched you do it." Serena's father, a silver-haired man named Charles Vale, who had spent the last decade buying his way onto 3 separate hospital boards, surged forward with the particular outrage of a man who had never once in his life been told no. "Now, hold on, Romano, you can't just—" "Charles," Dante said the name the way a man sets down a weapon he doesn't currently need. "The Meridian Group. 3.2 million in bridge financing, routed through a shell you think I don't know about. I own that paper. I can call it whenever I like. The silver-haired man's mouth opened and closed without sound. "Apologize," Dante said again, to Serena, gentler now, which was somehow more frightening than the anger. "Or I stop being patient with your father's debts." Serena Vale, heiress, socialite, a woman who had never in her adult life said sorry and meant it, turned toward Marisol with tears of humiliation standing in her eyes and said, in a voice that cracked down the middle, I'm sorry I tripped you. I shouldn't have, I'm sorry." The room exhaled. Marisol sat frozen in the lap of the most dangerous man in New York, feeling something she had not expected to feel in this moment at all. Not shame, not humiliation, but the strange, dizzying vertigo of watching cruelty get answered in real time, in public, by someone with the power to make it matter. She tried to stand. I'm sorry, I'm heavy, I should get up, Dante's hand did not move from her waist. "You are not hurting me," he said simply, as if the idea itself was mildly absurd. "Sit still. Your ankle is bleeding." Marisol looked down. A thin line of blood traced her ankle, where a shard of crystal had caught her on the way down. She hadn't even felt it. That was when Howard Blake arrived. Her manager moved through the parting crowd with the particular panic of a man watching his year-end bonus evaporate in real time, his face a shade of red that clashed badly with his bow tie. "Marisol." His voice was clipped, furious, aimed entirely at her and not once at the man whose lap she was sitting in. "My office. Now." "Howard, I was tripped. I didn't." "You caused a scene in front of half the donor board of this hotel," Howard hissed. "Premier Lux cannot be associated with this. You're done. You're fired. Clear your desk tomorrow." The words landed like a slap, and Marisol felt the floor of her entire life tilt sideways. Rent was due in 9 days. Her student loan payment cleared on the 14th. Her mother's chemotherapy copay was due at the end of the month, and Marisol had exactly one source of income standing in front of her, and it had just evaporated over a tripped tray and a stranger's cruelty. "Howard, please. I need this." Dante Romano rose from his chair with Marisol still braced in his arms, and the temperature of the room dropped 10 degrees. "She was assaulted," Dante said, "by one of your guests, and your response is to fire the woman who was attacked instead of the woman who attacked her. Mr. Romano, this is a private. Your agency failed to protect its own staff in a room full of witnesses," Dante said, "and now you want to punish her for surviving it. She doesn't work for you anymore, Blake. Not because you fired her, because I'm telling you that you're done deciding anything about her ever again." Howard Blake opened his mouth, found nothing in it, and closed it again. Marisol tried to stand once more, testing her weight on her ankle, and pain lanced up through her foot so sharply that her breath caught and her knee buckled. Before she could fall a second time in one night, Dante had lifted her fully into his arms, one arm beneath her knees, one arm braced solid across her back, and turned toward the ballroom doors. "Please," Marisol said, mortified, her hands pressed flat against his chest as if she could somehow make herself weigh less through sheer force of will. "Please, put me down. I'm too heavy." "You don't have to." "You are not too heavy," Dante said, and something in his voice had gone quiet and certain in a way that stopped her breath entirely. "Your doubt is the only thing in this room insulting my strength." He carried her through the ballroom. 200 of New York's wealthiest people parted in silence to let them pass. Politicians who had spent all night pretending not to watch the door. Socialites who had spent all night competing for his attention. Old money families who had built entire identities on the idea that people who looked like Marisol did not belong in rooms like this one. Every single one of them stepped aside. Marisol kept her eyes forward, her jaw tight, her heart hammering somewhere near her throat, and let a man she had known for exactly 11 minutes carry her out of the wreckage of her career and into a night she could not yet imagine. The armored car waited at the curb, black and heavy and humming with the particular silence of very expensive machinery. Dante set her down onto the leather seat with a gentleness that felt at odds with everything she'd just watched him do inside, and slid in beside her, and the door closed with a soft, final thunk that sealed out the cold October air and the last of the ballroom's chandelier light. Marisol turned on him the second the car pulled away from the curb. "What?" she said, her voice shaking with the effort of holding it steady. "Was that?" "That was me making sure you didn't get arrested tonight," Dante said. "Excuse me? You heard me. I got fired. In front of 200 people. Because you." She stopped, breathed, tried again. "Because of what happened at that table, I lost my job. I need that job, Mr. Romano. I have rent. I have loans. I have a mother in chemotherapy who needs her copay covered by the 14th. And now I have nothing. And you're sitting there telling me it was for my own good?" "Yes." That's not an answer. It's the only true one I have. Dante's dark eyes held hers, steady, unblinking, entirely without apology. At midnight, the FBI raids that ballroom. Marisol went still. Premier Lux Events, Dante continued, has spent the last 14 months laundering money for the Falcone family. Inflated catering invoices, phantom floral contracts, exclusive vendor fees that don't correspond to any actual vendor, staffing charges for events that never happened, luxury markups run through shell accounts that funnel straight back into Victor Falcone's construction rackets. That's not. I would have known. Your name is on the vendor approvals, Dante said quietly. Dozens of them. As senior coordinator, every markup that ran through that agency in the last year crossed your desk for sign-off at some point. You didn't know what you were approving. But the federal agents raiding that building at midnight won't care what you knew. They'll care what you signed. Marisol's hands had gone cold in her lap. You're saying I would have been arrested. I'm saying you would have been standing in that ballroom at midnight, employed by a company under federal indictment, with your signature on the paper trail, surrounded by armed agents with a warrant and no patience for nuance. Best case, you spend 18 months and your entire savings proving you didn't know. Worst case, a prosecutor decides you're a convenient name to make an example of. And instead, 200 witnesses just watched you get publicly, humiliatingly fired from that company before the raid even started, Dante said. There is a time-stamped, witnessed, undeniable line between you and Premier Lux Events. Howard Blake fired you himself, in front of the entire donor board. No prosecutor alive can argue you were still an active employee complicit in a laundering scheme you'd been severed from an hour before the warrants hit. Marisol stared at him. The car moved through the wet, glittering streets, streetlights sliding gold across the leather seats, and she felt something in her chest crack open with the particular vertigo of nearly falling off a cliff she hadn't known she was standing on. You planned that, she said slowly. The lap, the scene with Serena, all of it. Serena's cruelty wasn't planned, Dante said. I didn't know she'd trip you. That was her own ugliness, and it happened because I'd ignored her all night and she wanted an audience. But the moment she did it, I understood what it gave me. A public catalyst. A reason for a scene loud enough that your firing would happen in front of the entire room instead of quietly in some office tomorrow morning, after the raid, when it would have looked exactly like damage control instead of the truth. The truth being that I'd already decided to pull you out of that building before midnight, Dante said. One way or another. Serena just handed me a faster way to do it. Marisol sat with that for a long moment, the city lights sliding past the windows, her ankle throbbing dully where the crystal had cut her. Why me? She finally asked. You don't know me. I've worked 6 of your company's events in the last 6 months, and you have never once said a word to me. I've watched you work 6 events in the last 6 months, Dante said, and I've learned more about you in that time than most people learn about their own employees in 6 years. That's not an answer either. You're calm when everyone around you is panicking, Dante said. You solved a seating collision at the Whitmore in April, without anyone at either table ever knowing there'd been a problem. You talked a drunk city councilman out of a fight at the Ashford Room in June, using nothing but a joke about his tie. You do not fawn over money. I've watched you serve senators and hedge fund managers with the exact same professional warmth you use on the kitchen staff. And I've never once seen you flinch when someone with more money than sense treated you like furniture. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. You see the whole room. Most people in your position only see the parts of it that might tip them. Marisol didn't know what to say to that. I'm not offering you pity, Dante said, as if he'd read the thought forming behind her eyes. I'm offering you a job. Director of Operations, the Aurelia Hotel. It's mine, newly acquired, being renovated, about to reopen as the crown jewel of everything I own that's clean. 10 times what Blake was paying you. Full operational authority. Nobody overrides your decisions on that floor except me, and I don't intend to need to. You don't even know if I can run a hotel. I know you already do, Dante said. You've been running one for 6 years. Nobody's just given you the title yet. The car slowed, turned, and the glass tower of Dante Romano's building rose ahead of them into the black October sky, its upper floors lit gold against the dark, and Marisol Hayes sat in the leather seat of an armored car with a bleeding ankle and a dead job and an offer she didn't yet know how to hold, and understood, with a clarity that frightened her, that her life had just permanently changed shape. The penthouse was dark stone and warm leather, steel-framed windows rising 2 stories over a Manhattan skyline that glittered like something spilled and not yet cleaned up. A fire burned low in a hearth built into raw concrete. Armed men stood at quiet, unobtrusive posts near the elevator, present but nearly invisible, the way expensive security always is. A private doctor arrived within 20 minutes, cleaned and dressed the cut on Marisol's ankle, confirmed it was a mild sprain rather than a break, and left with the particular discretion of a man who had clearly been paid very well to forget names. Marisol sat on a leather sofa the size of her old studio apartment's living room, her foot elevated on a cushion, a glass of water she hadn't touched sweating on the table beside her, and watched the muted television across the room flicker to a breaking news banner. "Turn it up," she said. Dante crossed the room and did. FBI raids Manhattan Gala, the luxury event agency under federal investigation. The footage showed the Whitmore Grand's front entrance lit up in flashing blue and red, agents in windbreakers moving through the same doors. Marisol had walked through 8 hours earlier in her flats and headset, guests in evening wear being escorted out onto the sidewalk in the cold. A reporter stood at the police line, breathless, professional, narrating a story that had almost swallowed Marisol whole. Howard Blake, CEO of Premier Lux Events, was taken into federal custody tonight, the anchor said, as part of an ongoing investigation into a suspected money laundering operation allegedly linking the luxury event planning company to organized crime figures connected to the Falcone crime family. Sources say. Marisol sat very still, the glass of water forgotten, her own name unspoken on the broadcast and yet somehow deafening in its absence, because she understood now exactly how close she had come to hearing it there instead. "I could have been on that sidewalk," she said quietly. "In handcuffs." "You weren't," Dante said. "Because of you. Because of both of us," Dante said. "I saw the danger. You survived the scene that got you out of it. Don't hand me the whole story. You earned your half." Marisol looked at him, really looked, for the first time since the ballroom, past the tattooed hands and the charcoal suit and the reputation that walked into rooms before he did, and saw something she hadn't expected. Not the cold calculation of a man moving pieces on a board. Something steadier, something that looked, uncomfortably, like respect. "Tell me about the Aurelia," she said. "I bought it 8 months ago," Dante said, dropping into the chair across from her, elbows braced on his knees. "It's the last major property in the city still carrying Falcone-linked debt on its books. I bought out the debt, forced a sale, and I'm rebuilding it as the flagship of everything I own that doesn't need to hide from a federal auditor. Clean books. Clean staff, clean money, all the way down. Why does that need me? Because clean isn't the same as honest," Dante said. "I can build clean walls. I need someone incorruptible running what happens inside them. Someone the Falcones can't buy, can't threaten with money they don't have leverage over, can't seduce with a title. Someone who sees the whole floor, not just the tip." Marisol laughed, short and disbelieving. "You think elite guests are going to respect a plus-size woman running their 5-star hotel? Half that ballroom looked through me tonight like I was part of the carpet." "Let them," Dante said. She blinked. "Let them underestimate you," he said, leaning forward, his voice low and level and entirely without softness, which was somehow what made it land. "Let them assume the silence, the size, the flats instead of heels means there's nothing behind your eyes, and then remove them from your building the moment they mistake that silence for weakness. You don't need their respect walking in the door, Marisol. You need their compliance walking out of it, and you'll get both because you're better at this than anyone I've ever hired to run a property." "This isn't about how I look." "No," Dante said. "It's about what you can do. I'd be a fool to waste it pretending otherwise." Marisol sat with the fire crackling low behind him, the city glittering cold and enormous through the glass, her ankle throbbing gently under its wrap, and felt the last of her old life. Howard Blake's office, the narrow aisles built for thin women, 11 years of being essential and invisible in the same breath, settle quietly into the past. "Okay," she said. "Okay? I'll run your hotel, Mr. Romano." She met his eyes, steady now, the shake gone out of her voice. "But I run it. My decision's on that floor. No interference." Something moved across his face that might, in a less dangerous man, have been called a smile. "Deal," Dante said. 4 weeks later, the Aurelia reopened its doors to Manhattan for the first time in 3 years. And Marisol Hayes stood at the top of its grand marble staircase in a deep emerald gown cut and tailored specifically for her body. Not to hide it, not to apologize for it, but to move with it, to skim her curves and settle over her waist like it had been poured there, because it had been, by a designer Dante had quietly hired the week after she accepted the job. She had not become thin. She had not been transformed into something smaller to earn the right to stand at the top of those stairs. She had been transformed into something else entirely, seen. Below her, the lobby of the Aurelia glittered with 1,000 candles and 100 fresh arrangements of white orchids, string lights woven through the restored crystal fixtures overhead, marble floors polished to a mirror shine beneath the feet of the city's wealthiest and most curious guests. All of them here to see whether Dante Romano's newest gamble would sink or swim. Marisol descended the staircase like she owned every step of it, because, functionally, she did. "Table 12 wants a comp on the wine," a young server murmured into her earpiece, hurrying to catch her at the bottom of the stairs. "Table 12 is the Whitcombs, and they've comped their wine at every event in this city for a decade, because they know most coordinators are too intimidated to say no," Marisol said without breaking stride. "Tell them the wine list is a courtesy, not a negotiation. If they push, send them to me." "Yes, ma'am." "The mayor's table needs the seating chart adjusted. His chief of staff has a peanut allergy, and they've been seated next to the almond-crusted Branzino station." "Move it," Marisol said, already 3 steps ahead, already scanning the room for the next fire before it lit. "And tell the kitchen no almonds within 10 feet of that table tonight. Full stop." She corrected a bartender, overpouring comped cocktails to a table that hadn't earned them. She intercepted a red-faced guest attempting to bully a 19-year-old coat check attendant into finding a jacket that had, in fact, never been checked at all, and resolved it in 90 seconds flat, with a calm that left the guest apologizing before he understood he'd been maneuvered into it. She caught a vendor invoice that had been quietly padded by 11% and had the contract flagged for review before dessert was served. Dante's men stood at the perimeter of the room, watchful, present, silent. They did not speak for her. They did not need to. She had never needed anyone to. Word moved through the ballroom the way word always moves through rooms full of people who talk for a living, quietly, then all at once. The new director wasn't some decorative hire. She corrected billionaires without blinking. She ejected a drunk hedge fund manager from the premises with a smile so pleasant that he didn't fully register he'd been thrown out until he was standing on the sidewalk in the cold. By the end of the night, 3 separate socialites had already started calling her the Queen of the Aurelia, half in mockery and half, despite themselves, in genuine awe. Dante watched all of it from the shadowed edge of the mezzanine, a glass of scotch untouched in his hand, and felt something in his chest that had nothing to do with the ledgers he'd spent a decade cleaning and everything to do with the woman commanding his lobby like she'd been born to it. Their attraction, he understood now, had never been about the lap, the rescue, the spectacle of the gala. It had grown quietly in the weeks since, in 3-hour phone calls about staffing structures and vendor contracts, in the way she argued with him about budget lines without ever once softening her position to flatter his ego, in the fact that she had never, not once, treated his money like the most interesting thing about him. Respect first. Everything after had simply followed. It was well past midnight, the reopening gala thinning toward its final hour, when Marisol slipped away from the main floor to check the quiet VIP corridor on the hotel's 2nd level, a habit now. Walking her building the way a captain walks her ship, making sure every hallway that wasn't under a chandelier was still safe and clean and exactly as it should be. She did not expect to find Marco Falcone waiting for her there. He was younger than his father, 28 maybe, dark-haired, handsome in the loose, undisciplined way of a man who had never once had to earn anything he owned. He leaned against the corridor wall with the practiced ease of someone who had followed her, watched for the moment, and chosen his ground. "There she is," Marco said. Dante's little pet. Marisol's pulse spiked, but her spine did not bend. "This corridor is closed to guests, Mr. Falcone. I'll have security escort you out." "Escort me out." He laughed, low and ugly. "You know what my family lost because of you? Do you have any idea what you've cost us? Running your little hotel like it's the most important building in Manhattan. Fat little event planner playing at power. Dante burned millions of dollars of my father's clean money to put you in a nicer dress. I'd suggest you leave," Marisol said, her voice steady even as her heart slammed against her ribs, "before this becomes a much bigger problem for you than a bad night." Marco stepped closer, and the cold press of gunmetal against her stomach stole the rest of the air from her lungs. "You don't get to talk to me like you matter," he said. "Quiet now, dangerous now. You're a mistake he's going to regret." Marisol did not scream. She did not beg. Every instinct in her body screamed to fold, to shrink, to make herself small and harmless the way the world had spent her whole life training her to do in the presence of anger. And she refused it, spine straight, chin level, eyes locked on his. "Get your hand off your weapon," she said, "and get out of my hotel." She never found out if he would have pulled the trigger. Dante moved down the corridor like something unleashed, and the fight was over before Marisol fully understood it had started. A blur of motion, a sharp, sickening crack of bone, a strangled scream as Marco's wrist bent wrong and the gun clattered uselessly to the marble floor. Dante's forearm locked across his throat, pinning him hard against the wall. "You put a gun on her," Dante said, and his voice had dropped into something Marisol had never heard from him before, something with no bottom to it at all. Dante, I wasn't going to. You put a gun on her," Dante said again, quieter, which was somehow the most terrifying version of his voice yet. "In my building." For one suspended, airless moment, Marisol believed she was about to watch a man die in front of her. Dante's grip tightened. Marco's face went the color of ash. And then, with visible, deliberate effort, Dante stepped back. "Get out," he said. "Tell your father I let you walk out on your own 2 feet tonight as a courtesy I did not owe him. The next man he sends into my hotel doesn't leave it standing." 2 of Dante's guards materialized to drag Marco Falcone, cradling his broken wrist, out through the service exit, and the corridor fell into a ringing, exhausted silence. Marisol's knees gave out. Dante caught her before she hit the floor, both arms wrapping around her, holding her weight against his chest as easily as he had in the ballroom 4 weeks earlier. And this time there was no audience, no spectacle, nothing but the 2 of them and the aftershock trembling through her body. "Are you hurt?" His hands moved over her carefully, checking, his voice rough with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite fury, but sat somewhere dangerously between them. "No," Marisol managed. "No, I'm okay. I should have had more men on this floor." His jaw was tight, his eyes dark with something that looked almost like guilt. "I should have known Victor would send someone tonight of all nights. You didn't know. I should have." "Dante." She said his name for the first time all night, and it stopped him cold. "I'm okay. You got here." He looked down at her for a long moment, his hand cradling the back of her head, his other arm locked tight around her waist, and something in his composure, the careful, controlled distance he'd kept for 4 weeks, professional, respectful, patient, finally broke. "You're not just my employee," he said, low, rough. "You have to know that by now." Marisol looked up at him in the dim corridor light, her heart still hammering from the gun, and now from something else entirely, and answered the only way that felt honest. She kissed him. It was not gentle, it was not careful. It was 4 weeks of restraint and 11 years of being unseen and one terrifying, gunmetal cold moment of nearly not surviving the night, all of it breaking loose at once, his hands framing her face, hers fisted in the front of his jacket, both of them shaking slightly in the aftermath of violence and the sudden, undeniable weight of everything they'd been refusing to say. When they finally broke apart, breathless, foreheads pressed together, Marisol's voice came out unsteady. "That's going to complicate things." "Everything about you complicates things," Dante said. "I stopped minding weeks ago." Back in the penthouse, hours later, the city gone quiet and dark beyond the glass, Marisol sat curled into the corner of the leather sofa with a blanket around her shoulders and guilt sitting heavy in her chest. "This is escalating because of me," she said. "The gun, Marco, all of it. If I hadn't taken this job, the war was already happening," Dante said, sitting across from her, his tie gone, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, the tattoos on his forearms catching the low firelight. "Victor Falcone and I have been circling each other for 6 years, Marisol. Long before you ever walked into that ballroom, but he sent his son after me tonight because of what I represent to them now." "Yes," Dante admitted. "Because you matter. Because the Falcones finally understand that the woman running my hotel isn't a symbol. She's the mechanism. You've been quietly bleeding them dry for a month and neither of us even meant for it to happen that way." Marisol frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Every corporate account you've locked down for the Aurelia this month," Dante said, "was previously routed, one way or another, through Falcone-linked hospitality fronts. The law firm gala you booked last week, the tech conference contract you closed on Tuesday, the wedding block you secured for the Ashworth family. All of it used to flow quietly through companies Victor Falcone owns behind 3 or 4 layers of paper. You didn't just win business, Marisol. You cut off clean revenue. His organization was laundering through legitimate-looking hospitality contracts. You've done more damage to his operation in 4 weeks than I managed in the last year." Marisol sat back, stunned. "I didn't even know I was doing that." "That's exactly why it worked," Dante said. "You weren't trying to hurt him. You were just better than his fronts. And now Victor Falcone wants a sit-down." "A sit-down?" "A meeting," Dante said. "Formal, old rules. A chance to negotiate before this turns into something neither of us wants. A war fought in the streets instead of in ledgers. And you want me there." "I need you there," Dante corrected. "Not as decoration, not as bait. God knows not as bait, not after tonight. As the person who actually understands the numbers well enough to make Victor Falcone understand exactly how much he's already lost." Marisol looked at him for a long moment. The tattooed hands, the scotch he still hadn't touched, the exhaustion sitting behind his eyes from a night that had nearly ended in her death, and had somehow, instead, ended in the first honest kiss either of them had allowed themselves. "Weakness is something I hide," Dante said quietly, watching her face. "You are someone I stand beside. If that means you're standing in a room with Victor Falcone, so be it. I trust you there more than I'd trust half the men on my payroll." Marisol thought of Serena Vale's foot in the aisle, of Howard Blake's furious face, of 11 years spent making herself small enough not to be a liability in rooms exactly like this one. "Okay," she said. "I'll go." The sit-down took place 3 nights later in a private room above a restaurant on Mulberry Street that had been serving families like the Falcones and Romanos since Prohibition. Its walls dark wood and older photographs, the kind of place where business had been conducted quietly for 100 years. Victor Falcone sat at the head of a long table, with 4 of his remaining men flanking him, silver-haired, heavy-set, dressed in a suit that had gone slightly out of fashion sometime in the last decade and hadn't noticed. His eyes were flat and cold in the way of a man who had survived by outliving everyone who underestimated him. Until now. Dante entered first, and Marisol walked in beside him, not behind him. Beside him, in a fitted crimson dress that moved like liquid over her curves, a leather portfolio held steady in both hands, her chin level, her spine straight, her heels striking the old wood floor with a rhythm that refused entirely to apologize for the space she took up. Victor's eyes landed on her, and something in his face curdled into contempt. "This is who you brought," he said to Dante, not bothering to address her directly. "The fat girl from the gala." "Careful," Don said, low, and something in the room's temperature shifted just slightly. "No," Marisol said before Dante could continue, setting her portfolio down on the table with a soft, deliberate click. "Let him finish. I want to know exactly how you'd like to talk about the woman who spent the last month dismantling your clean revenue stream, Mr. Falcone. I have time." Silence. Victor's men exchanged a look. Victor himself said nothing, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowing. Marisol opened the portfolio. "3 of your hospitality front companies had their accounts frozen last week," she said, sliding a printed page across the table, after an SEC tip flagged irregular transaction patterns matching a laundering profile. "I'd be careful assuming that tip came from nowhere. You're bluffing." "Decrypted ledger fragments," Marisol continued, sliding a second page across, "show a laundering channel running from 3 catering fronts through a real estate holding company you control through your cousin's name. That channel has been quietly collapsing for 6 weeks because every event contract it used to launder through has been won, fairly by the Aurelia instead." Victor's face had gone the color of old paper. "Your organization's hospitality revenue is down 41% this quarter," Marisol said, sliding a 3rd page, the final one, across the polished wood. "Your legitimate income streams are collapsing, Mr. Falcone, not because Dante Romano broke your legs, because I outbid your front companies fair and clean, contract after contract, and you never once saw it coming because you assumed the woman running the numbers couldn't possibly be dangerous." The room was utterly silent. "Here are your terms," Marisol said, and her voice did not waver once. "You surrender your remaining hospitality and port-linked territories to Romano Properties. You leave New York within 90 days, or every document in this portfolio goes to the federal prosecutor currently building a case against Premier Lux Events. And I promise you, Mr. Falcone, they will be very interested in the paper trail connecting your name to it." Victor Falcone looked at her for a long, seething moment. At the crimson dress, the level chin, the portfolio full of the wreckage of his empire assembled by hands he had dismissed at first glance, and understood, with the particular fury of a man finally recognizing his own mistake, exactly who had beaten him. Dante said nothing. He didn't need to. His men stood at the doors, silent, absolute, a physical guarantee that this negotiation would end exactly the way the numbers said it should. Marisol had already won the war with a portfolio and a spine that refused to bend. Victor Falcone's jaw worked once, twice, and then, low and bitter, he said, "Fine, fine," Marisol repeated, closing the portfolio with a soft, final click. "I'm glad we understand each other." Back in the penthouse that night, the city glittering vast and quiet below the glass, Dante poured 2 glasses of scotch and handed one to Marisol, who took it and didn't drink it, her hands still faintly unsteady from a night that had ended, finally, in victory instead of violence. "You were magnificent," Dante said, and there was no calculation in it, no strategy, nothing but plain, unguarded truth. "I was terrified," Marisol admitted. "You didn't look it. I've had a lot of practice not looking it." She set the glass down, turned to face him fully. "Dante, I don't want to run your hotel as an employee anymore. I want to know what this actually is. Whatever's between us. I don't want you beneath me," Dante said. "Not as an employee, not as anything less than what you actually are. Then what do you want?" "I want you beside me," he said. "The way you were tonight. The way you were 4 weeks ago at the top of that staircase. The way you've been every single day since that ballroom, whether I've earned it or not." Marisol studied him, something sharp and searching in her gaze. "Is that what you actually want? Me beside you? Or me on your lap, where everyone in the room can see exactly what you own?" The question landed hard, and Dante didn't flinch from it. "The lap was survival," he said quietly. "I grabbed you because you were falling, and I wasn't going to let you hit the floor in front of 200 people who'd already decided you didn't matter. It was instinct, and it was protection, and yes, it was possessive, because in that half second I understood I would burn that entire ballroom down before I let anyone hurt you again. But this," he stepped closer, close enough that she had to tip her chin up to hold his eyes. "This is choice, every day since. Nobody's tripping you into my arms anymore, Marisol. I'm choosing to stand in them." Marisol felt something in her chest crack open, slow and warm. 11 years of learning to apologize for the space she occupied finally, quietly, coming undone. "I asked the Aurelia's board to make you a full partner in the legitimate side of everything I own," Dante said. "Not as a gift, because you've earned every square foot of it twice over. And I'm asking you, not telling you, asking, for the chance to love you without ever letting protection curdle into ownership. You get to say no. You get to say not yet. Whatever you say, I'm not walking away from this." Marisol looked at him for a long, silent moment, the fire crackling low behind him, the city glittering cold and enormous beyond the glass, and thought of every room she had ever shrunk herself to fit into, every aisle built too narrow, every mirror angled towards someone else's beauty, every apology she had offered for a body that had never once needed one. "I spent my whole life apologizing for taking up space," she said. "Then take more," Dante said. She closed the distance between them and kissed him, not out of fear this time, not out of the desperate aftershock of a gun and a blood-stained corridor, but simply because she wanted to. Because for the first time in 11 years, she was standing in a room built entirely to fit her, and the man in front of her had built it that way on purpose. Marisol Hayes had never been invisible. She understood that now, standing at the top of a marble staircase she'd claimed as her own, in a hotel that bore her fingerprints on every contract and every ledger and every carefully protected employee, the people who had looked through her at that first gala had never actually failed to seize her. They had simply been too shallow to recognize substance when it stood directly in front of them, in a size 20 body and comfortable flats. Dante Romano had not made her powerful. He had never needed to. The power had always been hers, in the calm competence, the steady spine, the refusal to shrink. What he had given her was something rarer than power, a room where the whole world was finally, undeniably, forced to recognize the power that had been there all along. The chandeliers over the Aurelia's grand staircase still burned every night, crystal and gold, casting their light down over marble floors and orchid arrangements in the quiet, absolute authority of the woman who ran the building beneath them. And every single person who walked through those doors, whether they meant to or not, learned very quickly to see her. So, did Dante go too far at that first gala, or exactly far enough? Was Marisol right to trust a man with his kind of reputation? And out of everything in this story, the public apology, the desperate rescue, or the sit-down where Marisol dismantled an empire with nothing but a portfolio and a steady voice, which moment felt the most satisfying to you? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories where the woman the world overlooks turns out to be the most dangerous person in the room, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that taking up space was never something to apologize for.